Lily groaned as she blinked against the sterile white light filtering through her eyelids. Her head throbbed, a dull, pulsing ache that made it hard to think. She tried to sit up but was immediately pushed back by a sharp pain in her ribs. Where was she? The last thing she remembered was the screech of tires and the sudden, jarring impact of her car colliding with something or someone. Her surroundings came into focus: plain white walls, a single metal chair, and the rhythmic beeping of a heart monitor. The place smelled faintly of antiseptic, but there was something else, a strange, musky scent that sent a shiver down her spine. This wasn't any ordinary hospital. The door creaked open, and a stern looking nurse stepped in, clipboard in hand. "You're awake," she said briskly, as if Lily's consciousness was a mere inconvenience. "You're in Ward 13. You were brought here after your accident." "Ward 13?" Lily echoed, her voice hoarse. "What kind of hospital is this?" The nurse didn't answer. Instead, she checked Lily's vitals with detached efficiency before leaving as quickly as she'd come. Lily was left alone with her racing thoughts and the unsettling feeling that she was being watched. Determined to get answers, she swung her legs over the edge of the bed, wincing as her bare feet touched the cold floor. She shuffled to the door and peeked out into the dimly lit corridor. It was eerily quiet, save for the occasional distant hum of machinery. The air seemed charged, heavy with a tension she couldn't quite place. Curiosity got the better of her, and she ventured further down the hall, her heart pounding with every step. She passed doors marked with strange symbols, each one more intricate than the last. A low, rumbling growl suddenly echoed through the corridor, freezing her in place. It was primal, almost animalistic, yet there was an edge of something distinctly human to it. Drawn toward the sound, Lily found herself standing before a reinforced glass window. Inside, a massive figure loomed in the shadows. His broad shoulders and powerful frame were unmistakable, even in the dim light. His eyes, glowing a fierce amber, locked onto hers, and for a moment, Lily forgot how to breathe. He stepped forward into the light. His face was sharp, almost regal, but there was no mistaking the beastly features. Thick fur lined his jaw, and his hands, large and clawed, flexed with restrained power. The growl intensified, vibrating through the glass as he bared his teeth in what might have been a warning or a challenge. Before Lily could process what she was seeing, a voice, smooth and laced with amusement, spoke from behind her. You've met Xander," it said. She spun around to see a man leaning casually against the wall, his silver hair catching the light. His eyes were a piercing green, and there was something sinuous about the way he moved, like a predator stalking its prey. "I wouldn't get too close," he continued, his tone light but carrying an undercurrent of danger. "He's not exactly known for his restraint." "Who are you?" Lily demanded, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to sound brave. The man pushed off the wall and approached her slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. "Silas," he said, inclining his head slightly. "And you, my dear, have stumbled into a very interesting place." Before she could respond, alarms blared, red lights flashing along the corridor. Silas's playful smirk vanished, replaced by a focused intensity. He grabbed Lily's arm, his grip firm but not painful, and pulled her into an adjoining room. "Stay here," he ordered, his voice low and commanding. "Don't move." Lily barely had time to nod before he disappeared, leaving her alone in the darkened room. Her pulse raced as she tried to make sense of what was happening. Who were these people? Or rather, what were they? The door suddenly burst open, and Lily's breath hitched as Xander stepped in, his hulking frame filling the doorway. His eyes, now a molten gold, locked onto hers with a burning intensity. He moved toward her, each step deliberate, his growl low and resonant. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice deep and rough, with a hint of concern that took her by surprise. I'm fine," she stammered, backing up until she hit the wall. But Xander didn't stop until he was mere inches away. His hand, massive and clawed, reached out to brush a stray lock of hair from her face. The touch was surprisingly gentle, sending a jolt of electricity through her. You shouldn't be here, he murmured, his gaze flicking to the marks now faintly glowing on her skin. It's dangerous. Lily's heart pounded as she struggled to find her voice. Why? What's happening to me? Xander's jaw tightened, but before he could answer, Silas reappeared, his expression unreadable. We don't have time for this, he said curtly. She needs to come with us. Xander hesitated, his eyes lingering on Lily for a moment longer before he stepped back. Silas extended a hand to her, his movements fluid and almost hypnotic. Trust me, he said, his voice softer now, almost coaxing. We'll explain everything, but you need to come with us. Lily looked between the two men, her instincts screaming at her to run, but something in their eyes, Xander's guarded warmth, Silas's unsettling calm, kept her rooted in place. She took Silas's hand, her fingers trembling slightly against his cool skin. As they led her deeper into the facility, the tension between the three of them was palpable. Every glance, every accidental brush of skin seemed to carry an unspoken weight. Lily knew she was stepping into a world she didn't understand, but there was no turning back now. Lily followed Xander and Silas through a labyrinth of corridors, each turn revealing more of the facility's strange and sterile architecture. The walls bore the same intricate symbols she'd seen earlier, their meaning just out of reach, yet they pulsed faintly as she passed, as if reacting to her presence. The air was thick with tension, the kind that wrapped around her chest and refused to let go. She wanted answers, but the weight of their silence pressed her questions back down. It wasn't until they entered a spacious room, lined with towering glass windows overlooking a dark forest, that Silas finally spoke. This place, he began, gesturing around them, isn't just a facility. It's a cage, and we're the beasts they've decided to keep locked inside. Lily crossed her arms, her brows furrowed. Beasts? You look human enough to me. Silas smirked, his sharp teeth catching the dim light. Is that what you see? You're not looking close enough. He stepped forward, circling her slowly, his eyes gleaming with a predatory edge. We're not like you, Lily. We come from a world where instinct reigns supreme, where power is survival. And here, he paused, his gaze dropping to the faint marks on her wrists. Here, we're prisoners. Xander, who had been silent until now, leaned against the far wall, his massive arms crossed over his chest. You shouldn't have been brought here, he said, his voice a low rumble. Humans don't belong in this place. Lily turned to him, her frustration bubbling to the surface. Then why am I here? Why did you stop me from leaving if it's so dangerous? Xander's eyes softened, though his jaw remained tight. Because once you've seen this world, it doesn't let you go. They won't let you go. Silas chuckled darkly. And because, like it or not, you've already become part of this. He pointed to the marks on her skin, which now pulsed faintly in rhythm with her heartbeat. Those aren't just pretty tattoos. They're a connection, a bond. Lily stared at her wrists, a cold dread settling in her stomach. A bond? With what? With us, Silas said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. He stepped closer, his presence both intoxicating and overwhelming. You felt it, haven't you? The pull. The way your pulse quickens when we're near. It's not coincidence. Her breath caught as Silas reached out, his fingers brushing against the inside of her wrist. The touch was light, almost reverent, but it sent a wave of heat coursing through her. Xander's growl cut through the charged moment, his eyes narrowing as he pushed off the wall. That's enough, Silas, Xander said, his tone carrying an authority that brooked no argument. Silas raised his hands in mock surrender, though the playful glint in his eyes remained. Just making a point, he said, stepping back. She needs to understand what she's dealing with. Lily pulled her hand back, her mind racing. So, what? You're saying I'm connected to you somehow? That's insane. Maybe, Silas said with a shrug. But that doesn't make it any less real. Xander moved closer, his towering form casting a shadow over her. It's not just about us, he said, his voice gentler now. These marks mean you're tied to our world. They'll change you, make you stronger, but they'll also make you a target. Target for what? Lily asked, her throat tightening. For those who want our power, Xander replied, his eyes darkening. Not all of us came here willingly, and not all of us believe in peace. Silas leaned against the edge of a table, his expression unreadable. Some see humans like you as tools, a way to amplify their strength. If they find out what you are, they'll stop at nothing to take you. The weight of their words settled heavily on Lily's shoulders. She backed away, shaking her head. This is insane. I'm just a normal person. I didn't ask for any of this. Neither did we, Xander said quietly, his gaze unwavering. But now you have to decide how you're going to survive it. Before Lily could respond, the room's lights flickered and an alarm blared, cutting through the tense atmosphere. Xander and Silas exchanged a quick glance, their postures shifting instantly to one of readiness. Stay close, Xander ordered, his voice all command as he moved toward the door. Silas grabbed Lily's hand, his grip firm but reassuring. You're safer with us than alone, he said, leading her toward the exit. The corridor outside was chaos. Red lights pulsed overhead, and the air buzzed with the sound of heavy footsteps and distant growls. They moved quickly, Xander taking point while Silas kept close to Lily's side. Her heart pounded as they passed other rooms, each one housing a figure more terrifying than the last. Some creatures slammed against their reinforced windows, their eyes wild with fury, while others simply watched, their gazes filled with quiet menace. Where are we going? Lily asked, her voice barely audible over the alarms. To a secure area, Xander replied without looking back. If there's a breach, we need to keep you out of sight. A breach? Lily's stomach twisted. You mean something got out? Not just something, Silas said grimly. Someone. And if they're loose, it means they're hunting. They rounded a corner, and Xander suddenly stopped, holding up a hand. He sniffed the air, his eyes narrowing. They're close, he said, his voice low. Silas nodded, his grip tightening on Lily's hand. We need to move, now. But before they could take another step, a shadowy figure emerged from the darkness ahead. It was another demihuman, his form lean and wolf-like, his eyes glowing a fierce red. A cruel smile spread across his face as he took in the trio. Well, the newcomer said, his voice a mocking drawl. Looks like I found myself a little prize. Xander stepped forward, his body tense and ready for a fight. You don't want to do this, he warned, his voice a low growl. The wolf-like demihuman chuckled, his gaze flicking to Lily. Oh, but I do. She smells delightful. Silas pulled Lily behind him, his expression turning deadly. Last warning, he said coldly. Back off. The air crackled with energy as the two groups faced off, the tension thick enough to cut. Lily's pulse raced, the marks on her skin flaring with heat as the primal energy around her intensified. She knew this was only the beginning. The wolf-like demi-human lunged forward, his claws extended and eyes gleaming with malicious intent. Xander met him head-on, their collision sending a shockwave through the corridor. The two grappled fiercely, growls and snarls echoing off the metal walls as they fought for dominance. Silas pulled Lily further back, positioning himself between her and the chaos. Stay behind me, he said, his voice steady despite the tension in his body. His sharp eyes stayed fixed on the fight, ready to intervene if necessary. Xander's strength was formidable, each strike calculated and precise. He drove the wolf back with a powerful swipe, but his opponent was fast, dodging and countering with a savage ferocity. The air grew thick with a scent of blood as both combatants pushed themselves to their limits. Lily's heart pounded as she watched, a mix of fear and awe swirling within her. She could feel the energy radiating from them, a primal force that seemed to pulse in time with the marks on her wrists. Her skin tingled, a strange heat spreading through her as if her body was reacting to their power. The wolf snarled, his lips curling back to reveal razor-sharp teeth. You think you can protect her? He taunted, his voice dripping with contempt. She's already marked. It's only a matter of time before she's ours. Xander's growl deepened, his eyes burning with fury. Not while I'm still standing, he shot back, launching himself at the wolf with renewed vigor. The fight intensified, each blow landing with bone-crunching force. But despite Xander's skill, the wolf was relentless, using his speed and agility to keep the upper hand. A wicked grin spread across the wolf's face as he spotted an opening, his claws aiming for Xander's unprotected side. Before the strike could land, Silas moved. In a blur of motion, he stepped forward, his body coiled like a spring. His tail lashed out, wrapping around the wolf's ankle and yanking him off balance. The wolf stumbled, snarling in frustration as he tried to regain his footing. "Enough," Silas said coldly, his grip tightening. "You're not welcome here." The wolf struggled against the hold, but Silas's strength was deceptive. With a sharp twist, he sent the wolf crashing to the ground, pinning him in place. Xander loomed over their fallen opponent, his breathing heavy but controlled. "This is your last chance," Xander growled, his voice low and dangerous. "Leave now, or you won't leave at all." The wolf sneered, but the fight had drained from his eyes. He knew he was outmatched. With a final, defiant growl, he pushed himself to his feet, shaking off Silas's grip. "This isn't over," he spat, retreating into the shadows. "You can't protect her forever." As the wolf disappeared, the tension in the air slowly began to dissipate. Xander and Silas exchanged a brief glance before turning their attention back to Lily. She stood frozen, her mind racing as she tried to process what she had just witnessed. Xander approached her cautiously, his expression softening. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice gentle despite the lingering edge of his earlier fury. Lily nodded slowly, though her legs felt like jelly beneath her. I think so," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What was that? Why did he say I'm marked?" Silas stepped closer, his usual smirk replaced by a serious demeanor. "Because you are," he said, his eyes meeting hers. "Those marks on your skin aren't just for show. They're a bond, a connection to our world and our power. And some will do anything to claim that power for themselves." Lily looked down at her wrists, the glowing symbols now faint but still visible. She could feel the weight of their significance, the way they seemed to hum in response to the presence of Xander and Silas. "So, I'm connected to you?" she asked, her voice tinged with both curiosity and unease. Xander nodded, his gaze steady. "It's more than that," he said. "The bond ties us together. It makes us stronger, but it also makes you a target." Lily swallowed hard, the reality of her situation sinking in. "And what happens if someone like him tries to claim me?" she asked, her eyes flicking to the spot where the wolf had stood. Silas's expression darkened. "They won't get the chance," he said, his voice firm. "We won't let that happen." Despite their assurances, Lily couldn't shake the feeling of vulnerability. The marks on her skin were a constant reminder that her life was no longer her own, that she was now part of a world she barely understood. But as she looked into the eyes of the two men before her, she felt a flicker of something else: trust. Xander's steady presence and Silas's sharp wit were a strange comfort, a reminder that she wasn't facing this alone. For better or worse, they were in this together. "Come on," Xander said, his tone soft but insistent. "We need to get to a safer location." Silas nodded in agreement, his usual playful demeanor returning as he offered Lily his hand. "Shall we?" he asked, a hint of mischief in his voice. "I promise the next stop will be a bit more comfortable." Lily hesitated for a moment before taking his hand, the warmth of his touch sending a small jolt through her. Together, they followed Xander down the corridor, leaving the chaos behind. But even as they moved forward, Lily couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The danger was far from over, and the bond that tied them together was growing stronger with every step. Lily followed Xander and Silas into a secluded part of the facility, a section far from the chaos and pulsing alarms. The room they entered was larger than she expected, its walls lined with reinforced panels and a soft glow emanating from the ceiling. A single couch and a low table sat in the center, giving the space an oddly domestic feel despite its stark surroundings. Xander closed the door behind them, his shoulders visibly relaxing for the first time since the fight. Silas, ever the contrast, flopped onto the couch with a dramatic sigh, draping one arm over the backrest as he gave Lily a pointed look. You look like you've seen a ghost, Silas teased, though his voice lacked its usual sharpness. Or maybe it's just starting to sink in how much trouble you're really in. Lily shot him a glare, but said nothing. Instead, she sank into the chair opposite him, her mind racing with questions. Her hands rested on her knees, and her eyes fell to the faint marks on her wrists. They were still warm, as if they held a life of their own. What exactly are these bonds supposed to do? She asked, breaking the silence. Her voice was steady, though she couldn't hide the edge of fear beneath her words. You said they make us connected. But what does that actually mean? Xander moved to stand by the window, his arms crossed over his chest. He didn't answer right away, his gaze fixed on the dark forest beyond the glass. It was Silas who spoke first, his tone unusually serious. The bonds are a lifeline, he explained, his green eyes locking onto hers. They tie you to us and us to you. They amplify our strength, our senses, even our instincts. But they're not just physical, they're emotional, too. They blur the lines. Lily frowned, leaning forward slightly. Blur the lines? Between what? Silas tilted his head, his smirk returning, though it was softer now. Between us and you. Between what we feel and what we need. Before Lily could press further, Xander finally spoke, his deep voice cutting through the room. It also means we can protect you better, he said without turning around. The bond gives us a heightened awareness of your presence. We'll know if you're in danger, if you're hurt, or if you're scared. His last words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. Lily felt a flicker of heat rise to her cheeks, though she quickly pushed it aside. And what about the other side of it? She asked, her gaze shifting between them. What does it do to me? Silas leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. It makes you stronger, he said, his voice low and almost hypnotic. It heightens your senses, makes you more in tune with us. But it also makes you desirable. Lily's breath hitched, and she quickly looked away, her heart pounding in her chest. She could feel Silas's eyes on her, the weight of his words settling deep within her. The room seemed smaller now, the air charged with an unspoken tension. Xander turned from the window and walked over, his presence grounding. He crouched down in front of Lily, his amber eyes searching hers. It's a lot to take in, he said gently. But you need to understand, this bond is both a blessing and a curse. It ties us together, for better or worse. And it makes you a target. Lily nodded slowly, her mind struggling to process everything. So, what now? She asked quietly. Do I just wait for someone else to come after me? Not if we can help it, Silas said, his voice carrying a note of defiance. He stood and moved to her side, his hand brushing lightly against her shoulder. The touch was brief but electric, sending a shiver down her spine. We'll train you, teach you how to use the bond to your advantage. You're not helpless, Lily. Xander stood as well, his towering presence reassuring. We'll make sure you're ready, he said, his voice firm. But for now, you need to rest. Your body is still adjusting, and you've been through a lot. Lily hesitated, her eyes flicking between them. Despite the whirlwind of emotions and revelations, she found herself trusting them more than she ever thought possible. They had risked their lives to protect her, and their bond, whatever it truly was, felt unbreakable. With a reluctant nod, she stood and moved toward the couch. Silas stepped aside to give her space, his expression softening. As she sat down, Xander crossed the room and retrieved a blanket, draping it over her shoulders with surprising tenderness. Try to get some sleep, he said, his voice low. We'll be here if you need anything. Lily leaned back, the weight of exhaustion finally catching up to her. Her eyes fluttered shut, and for the first time since arriving in the facility, she felt a small sense of peace. As the room fell into a comfortable silence, Silas glanced at Xander, his usual smirk returning. Think she'll last? He asked, his tone light, but carrying an undertone of genuine concern. Xander's gaze remained on Lily, his expression unreadable. She's stronger than she looks, he said quietly. She'll make it. Silas nodded, his playful demeanor softening once more. Let's hope you're right, he said, settling into a chair across the room. The two men kept watch as Lily slept, their unspoken bond as protectors solidified by the shared understanding of what lay ahead. Outside, the darkness deepened and the facility grew quiet, but the tension in the air remained. They knew this peace was temporary. The real fight was still to come. Lily stirred awake, the weight of the blanket on her shoulders and the low hum of the facility's systems grounding her in the present. The tension from earlier had eased, though her mind was still a storm of questions and half-formed fears. She blinked against the soft light and realized she wasn't alone. Xander stood by the window, his silhouette framed by the faint glow of the moon beyond the forest. His broad shoulders and quiet strength filled the room, a reassuring presence. Silas was draped over the chair across from her, his silver hair catching the light as he watched her with a lazy, almost feline curiosity. Finally awake, Silas drawled, his voice smooth and unhurried. We were starting to think you'd sleep through the apocalypse. Lily sat up, adjusting the blanket around her. How long was I out? Long enough, Xander replied without turning from the window. You needed the rest. The warmth in his tone caught her off guard, and she found herself watching him for a moment longer than she intended. There was a calm in his presence that steadied her, a quiet assurance that she wasn't facing this alone. Silas stretched, his movements languid. Well, now that you're up, it's time we get to work. Lily raised an eyebrow. Work. Silas grinned, pushing himself to his feet. You didn't think we'd let you sit around and wait for the next attack, did you? If you're going to survive this, you need to learn how to use the bond. Xander finally turned from the window, his expression serious. He's right. The bond isn't just a connection, it's a tool. If you can harness it, you'll be able to sense danger before it happens, even defend yourself if necessary. Lily swallowed hard, the weight of their words settling in. She had never been much of a fighter, but she knew they were right. If she was going to survive in this new world, she couldn't rely on them to protect her forever. What do I need to do? She asked, her voice steady despite the nervous flutter in her chest. Silas's grin widened. That's the spirit. He motioned for her to stand, his green eyes gleaming with excitement. Let's start simple. Focus on the marks. Lily held out her wrists, the faint symbols glowing softly in response to their proximity. She could feel the bond, a subtle hum beneath her skin that pulsed in time with her heartbeat. Silas stepped closer, his hand brushing lightly against hers as he guided her fingers over the marks. Close your eyes, he said softly. Feel the energy. It's like a thread connecting you to us. Lily did as he instructed, her breath slowing as she focused on the sensation. The hum grew stronger, a warmth spreading through her body as the connection deepened. She could sense them, Xander's steady presence, grounded and strong, and Silas's sharp, electric energy, always in motion. Good, Xander said, his voice low and encouraging. Now, focus on me. Lily turned her attention to Xander, the bond shifting as she concentrated. She could feel his calm strength, a steady pulse of energy that seemed to anchor her in place. It was comforting, a quiet reassurance that she wasn't alone. Now, try to sense what I'm feeling, Xander continued. The bond allows us to share more than just energy. It's a two-way connection. Lily furrowed her brow, focusing harder. At first, there was only the steady rhythm of his presence, but slowly, she began to pick up on something else. A flicker of tension beneath the calm, a guarded protectiveness that spoke of his constant vigilance. You're worried, she said softly, opening her eyes. Xander nodded, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. Good. You're starting to understand. Silas clapped his hands, breaking the moment. Not bad for a beginner, he said, his tone teasing. But let's see if you can handle something more challenging. Before Lily could respond, Silas stepped even closer, his fingers brushing against her cheek. The contact was light, almost reverent, but it sent a jolt of energy through her that made her breath catch. Now focus on me, he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Feel my energy, my thoughts. Let the bond guide you. Lily's pulse quickened as she closed her eyes again, her senses reaching out towards Silas. His energy was different from Xander's, more intense and unpredictable. It was like trying to hold onto a live wire, the current shifting and sparking in ways that left her breathless. She could sense his emotions, a complex web of confidence and curiosity, but there was something deeper beneath the surface. A flicker of vulnerability, carefully hidden but undeniably there. It was a side of Silas she hadn't expected, and it made her heart ache in a way she didn't fully understand. "You're hiding something," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Silas's grin faltered for a moment, his eyes searching hers. "We all have our secrets," he said lightly, though there was a hint of something deeper in his tone. Before the moment could stretch further, Xander stepped in, his voice grounding. "That's enough for now. She's still adjusting." Silas sighed dramatically, stepping back with a playful shrug. "Fine, fine. But you're doing well, Lily. Better than I expected." Lily opened her eyes, her heart still racing from the intensity of the connection. She could feel the bond more clearly now, a living thread that tied her to both of them. It was overwhelming, but also strangely comforting. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside her. Xander nodded, his expression warm. "We'll keep practicing. The more you understand the bond, the stronger you'll become." Lily met his gaze, a sense of determination settling in her chest. She didn't know what the future held, but with Xander and Silas by her side, she knew she was ready to face it. Lily paced the length of the room, her thoughts a tangled mess. The training had been intense, more emotionally draining than she'd anticipated. Each connection with Xander and Silas pulled her deeper into their world, into the bond that tied them together in ways she still didn't fully understand. The marks on her wrists tingled constantly now, a reminder of her growing connection to them and the danger that came with it. She glanced toward the others. Xander was seated by the window, his gaze distant as he watched the forest outside. He seemed calm, but Lily could feel the undercurrent of tension in him through the bond. Silas, on the other hand, lounged casually on the couch, a sly smirk on his lips as he twirled a small dagger between his fingers. Despite his relaxed posture, there was a sharpness in his eyes, a constant readiness that made her uneasy. She stopped pacing, turning to face them. "There's something you're not telling me," she said, her voice firm. "What's really going on here? Why did those marks appear on me? And why do I feel like everything in this place is connected to me somehow?" Silas raised an eyebrow, his smirk widening. "You're perceptive, I'll give you that," he said, tossing the dagger aside and leaning forward. "But are you sure you're ready for the truth?" Lily crossed her arms, refusing to back down. "I think I deserve it." Xander sighed, standing from his seat by the window. He crossed the room slowly, his presence commanding as he stopped a few steps away from her. "You're right," he said, his deep voice steady. "There's more to this than we've told you." He glanced at Silas, who gave a small nod, his playful demeanor fading. Xander turned his attention back to Lily, his amber eyes serious. "The accident that brought you here wasn't random," he said. "You were chosen." Lily's heart skipped a beat. "Chosen? For what?" Xander hesitated, and it was Silas who spoke next. "To be a bridge," he said, his voice uncharacteristically solemn, "between our world and yours." Lily stared at them, her mind racing. "A bridge? What does that even mean?" Xander took a step closer, his expression softening. "Our worlds are connected, but the balance between them is fragile. The bond you share with us strengthens that connection. It makes you a stabilizing force." Silas stood, his movements fluid as he approached her. "But it also makes you valuable," he added, "to those who want to control that balance or break it." Lily's stomach twisted as the weight of their words sank in. "So that's why that wolf guy attacked me," she said quietly. "He wanted to use me." Silas nodded, his green eyes darkening. "And he won't be the last." Lily felt a wave of fear, but she quickly pushed it aside. She wouldn't let herself be a victim. Not anymore. "Then we need to stop them," she said, determination hardening her voice. I'm not going to just sit around and wait for someone else to come after me. Xander placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch warm and reassuring. We will, he said, but you need to be prepared. There's still a lot you don't know about the bond, about what you're capable of. Silas's smirk returned, though it was softer this time. And lucky for you, you've got two excellent teachers. Lily managed a small smile despite the heaviness of the conversation. I guess I'm in good hands then. Silas chuckled, his usual playfulness creeping back into his voice. The best, darling. Xander shot him a warning look, but Silas only shrugged, unbothered. Lily couldn't help but feel a flicker of warmth at their dynamic. Despite their differences, they worked well together, and she was grateful to have them by her side. The room fell into a comfortable silence for a moment, the weight of the conversation lingering but not oppressive. Lily could feel the bond between them strengthening, a steady pulse of energy that tied them together. It was strange, but it also felt right, as if they were meant to be connected. She glanced down at the marks on her wrists, their glow faint but constant. They were a reminder of everything she'd been through, but also of the strength she was finding within herself. She wasn't the same person she had been when she first arrived at the facility. She was stronger now, more determined. And she knew that whatever came next, she wouldn't face it alone. Xander moved back to the window, his gaze thoughtful. We'll start again in the morning, he said. For now, get some rest. You'll need your strength. Silas gave a mock salute, but there was a hint of sincerity in his tone as he said, You heard the man. Get some sleep, Lily. Lily nodded, her exhaustion catching up with her as the adrenaline from the conversation began to fade. She settled back onto the couch, pulling the blanket around her. Despite everything, she felt a sense of peace, knowing that she was no longer fighting this battle alone. As she closed her eyes, she felt the bond pulse gently, a comforting presence that lulled her into a deep sleep. Outside, the forest remained dark and still, but the danger was far from over. They all knew that the fight was just beginning. Lily woke to the sound of a distant rumble, like a storm brewing just beyond the walls of the facility. Her eyes fluttered open, and for a moment, she forgot where she was. The dim light, the cold metallic feel of the room, and the steady hum of machines brought her back to reality. She sat up, the blanket slipping from her shoulders, and noticed Xander and Silas were both awake, their postures tense. Xander stood near the door, his arms crossed as he listened intently to the faint sounds beyond. Silas was perched on the arm of the couch, his usual smirk replaced by a thoughtful frown. The air between them was charged, and Lily could feel the unease through the bond. What's going on? She asked, her voice breaking the silence. Xander turned his head slightly, his amber eyes meeting hers. There's been a breach, he said, his tone grim. Someone's trying to get in. Silas twirled a small blade between his fingers, his green eyes sharp and focused. And judging by the noise, they're not here for a friendly chat. Lily's heart began to race, but she forced herself to stay calm. She stood, her bare feet touching the cold floor as she moved closer to them. What do we do? She asked, her voice steady despite the fear creeping into her chest. Xander's gaze softened slightly, a hint of reassurance in his expression. We protect you, he said firmly, no matter what. Silas gave a lazy shrug, though there was a dangerous edge to his smirk. And if they're stupid enough to come for us, we'll make sure they regret it. The rumble grew louder, the sound of metal groaning and distant footsteps echoing through the halls. Lily could feel the tension rising, the bond between her and the two men pulsing with a mixture of fear and determination. Xander moved to the control panel by the door, pressing a few buttons to bring up a security feed. The screen flickered to life, showing several figures moving through the corridors. They were demihumans, their forms distorted by the grainy footage, but their intent was clear. They're heading this way, Xander said, his jaw tightening. Silas pushed off the couch, stretching lazily as if he were preparing for a game rather than a fight. Looks like it's showtime, he said, twirling the blade once more before tucking it into his belt. Lily felt a surge of fear, but she quickly pushed it aside. She wasn't the same helpless girl she had been when she first arrived. She had the bond now, and she wasn't going to let anyone use her as a pawn. I want to help, she said, her voice firm. Xander's eyes softened, but he shook his head. Your job is to stay safe, he said. We'll handle this. Silas raised an eyebrow, his smirk returning. She's got guts, I'll give her that, he said, his tone teasing. But Xander's right. Let us do the heavy lifting. Lily clenched her fists, frustration bubbling beneath the surface. She hated feeling like a burden, but she also knew they were right. She wasn't ready to face whatever was coming, not yet. The sound of footsteps grew louder, and Xander stepped forward, positioning himself in front of the door. Silas moved to the side, his movements fluid and precise. They were a study in contrasts, Xander's solid, unyielding presence, and Silas's quick, almost playful energy. But together, they were a formidable force. The door shuddered as something heavy slammed against it, the metal bending under the pressure. Lily's heart raced, the bond flaring with adrenaline as she felt their determination and focus. Xander's growl was low and steady, a warning to whatever was on the other side. Stay back, Xander said, his voice a low rumble. And no matter what happens, don't open this door. Lily nodded, taking a step back as the door buckled again. The tension was almost unbearable, the air thick with anticipation. She could feel the bond pulsing, a steady rhythm that connected her to them, grounding her even as fear threatened to take hold. The door finally gave way, crashing inward as the attackers burst through. Xander moved first, his massive form a blur, as he met the first demi-human head-on. The impact was brutal, the sound of fists meeting flesh echoing through the room. Silas was right behind him, his movements quick and precise as he engaged another attacker, his blade flashing in the dim light. Lily watched in awe and fear as the battle unfolded before her. Xander's strength was overwhelming, each strike sending his opponents reeling. His growls were deep and feral, a reminder of the beast lurking beneath his controlled exterior. Silas, on the other hand, was like a dancer, his movements fluid and graceful as he dodged and struck with precision. Despite their skill, the attackers were relentless, their numbers making up for their lack of finesse. Lily could feel the strain through the bond, the way Xander and Silas pushed themselves to their limits to protect her. One of the attackers broke through their defenses, heading straight for Lily. Her heart leapt into her throat, but she stood her ground, her fists clenched as she prepared to defend herself. Before the demi-human could reach her, Xander was there, his massive hand gripping the attacker's arm and hurling him across the room. Stay away from her, Xander growled, his eyes blazing with fury. The fight continued, each moment a blur of motion and sound. Lily could feel the bond pulsing, her connection to Xander and Silas growing stronger with every passing second. She could sense their determination, their unyielding resolve to protect her at all costs. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the attackers began to falter. One by one, they retreated, their wounds and exhaustion forcing them to flee. Xander and Silas stood victorious, their breathing heavy as they watched the last of the intruders disappear into the shadows. The room fell silent, the tension slowly dissipating as the immediate danger passed. Xander turned to Lily, his eyes softening as he approached her. Are you okay? He asked, his voice gentle. Lily nodded, her heart still racing. I'm fine, she said, her voice steady. Thanks to you. Silas gave a weary grin, wiping a trickle of blood from his lip. Not bad for a night's work, he said, his tone light despite the exhaustion in his eyes. Xander placed a reassuring hand on Lily's shoulder, his touch grounding. We'll get through this, he said, together. Lily met his gaze, a sense of determination settling in her chest. They had won this battle, but she knew the war was far from over. Together, they would face whatever came next. The aftermath of the fight left the room in disarray. Shattered metal fragments and overturned furniture littered the floor, while the faint scent of blood lingered in the air. Xander and Silas worked quickly, clearing debris and checking the facility's perimeter for any signs of a second wave. Meanwhile, Lily sat on the edge of the couch, her thoughts racing as she replayed the battle in her mind. Her wrists still tingled with the faint hum of the bond, a constant reminder of the connection she shared with them. She could feel their exhaustion, the way their energy waned after the intense fight. But she also felt their determination, an unyielding resolve to keep her safe no matter the cost. Silas returned first, his usual smirk replaced by a tired but satisfied expression. He tossed a bent piece of metal onto the pile of debris and stretched, his movements fluid despite the weariness in his body. Well, that was fun, he said, his tone laced with sarcasm. Remind me to send those guys a thank you card for the workout. Lily managed a small smile, though her heart still pounded from the adrenaline. Are they gone? She asked. For now, Silas replied, flopping onto the arm of the couch beside her. But they'll be back. They always are. Xander entered a moment later, his amber eyes scanning the room before settling on Lily. He crossed to her side, his movements deliberate and steady. We've secured the perimeter, he said, his deep voice reassuring. But Silas is right. This isn't over. Lily looked up at him, her chest tightening. Why do they keep coming after me? She asked, her voice filled with frustration. What makes me so important? Xander hesitated, his jaw tightening. He glanced at Silas, who gave a small nod, silently urging him to continue. Xander sighed, kneeling in front of her, so their eyes were level. Lily, the bond you share with us isn't just a connection, he said, his tone serious. It's a source of power, one that strengthens not only us, but anyone who tries to claim it. To them, you're a key, someone who can tip the balance between our worlds. Silas leaned forward, his green eyes sharp. And trust me, there are plenty of people out there who'd love to get their hands on that kind of power. Lily's heart sank as their words sank in. She had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed made the weight of her situation even heavier. So, I'm just a tool to them, she said quietly. Something to be used. Xander placed a hand on her knee, his touch warm and steady. Not to us, he said firmly. You're more than that, Lily. You're part of this team, part of this fight. We won't let them take you. Silas smirked, though there was genuine warmth in his gaze. Besides, you've proven you're not exactly helpless, he said. You've got fire, and that's going to get us through this. Lily felt a flicker of hope at their words. Despite the danger and uncertainty, she wasn't alone. They believed in her, and she was starting to believe in herself too. Suddenly, the hum of the facility's systems changed, a low warning tone echoing through the room. Xander stood immediately, his eyes narrowing as he moved to the control panel. He pressed a few buttons, bringing up a display that showed a red alert flashing across multiple sections of the facility. What now? Silas muttered, standing as well. Xander's expression darkened as he read the display. There's been a breach in the energy core, he said. It's destabilizing. Lily frowned, standing beside him. What does that mean? It means this whole place could go up in flames if we don't fix it, Silas said grimly. And fast. Xander turned to her, his gaze steady. Lily, the core is tied to the bond. If we don't stabilize it, the connection between our worlds could collapse. We need your help. Lily's stomach churned, but she nodded, determination hardening her resolve. Tell me what to do. Silas grinned, though the tension in his eyes remained. That's the spirit. Let's move. They made their way through the facility, the warning lights casting an eerie red glow along the corridors. The air grew warmer as they neared the core, the hum of the machinery growing louder with each step. Lily could feel the bond pulsing stronger now, the energy around her almost overwhelming. They entered the core chamber, a massive room dominated by a glowing crystalline structure at its center. The core pulsed with an unstable rhythm, cracks spreading across its surface as the energy within threatened to explode. Xander and Silas moved quickly, taking positions on either side of the core. They placed their hands on the crystalline surface, their eyes glowing as they channeled their energy into it. The bond flared, the marks on Lily's wrists burning with intensity as she felt their power surge through her. Lily, Xander said, his voice strained. We need you to focus. Use the bond to stabilize the core. Lily stepped forward, her heart pounding as she placed her hands on the core. The energy was intense, almost unbearable, but she pushed through it, focusing on the bond. She could feel Xander and Silas, their strength flowing into her as they worked together to bring the core back under control. The room shook, the cracks in the core spreading further. Sweat dripped down Lily's face as she concentrated, her entire body trembling from the effort. The bond pulsed, a steady rhythm that guided her as she channeled her energy into the core. Slowly, the cracks began to heal, the unstable pulses of energy smoothing out. The glow of the core steadied, its rhythm returning to normal. The tension in the room eased as the warning lights faded, replaced by the soft hum of the stabilized system. Lily sagged, her legs nearly giving out beneath her. Xander was there in an instant, his strong arms catching her before she fell. "You did it," he said, his voice filled with pride. Silas leaned against the core, his usual smirk returning. "Not bad, newbie," he said, though his tone was warm. "You've got a knack for this." Lily managed a tired smile, her chest heaving as she caught her breath. Despite the exhaustion, she felt a sense of accomplishment. They had faced another challenge together, and they had won. But as she looked at the core, a lingering unease settled in her chest. She knew this was only a temporary victory. The fight was far from over, and the stakes were higher than ever. The core chamber was silent now, save for the faint hum of stabilized energy pulsing through the crystalline structure. Lily leaned heavily against Xander, her body drained from the effort of channeling the bond's power. Her breaths came in shallow gasps, but beneath the exhaustion was a sense of triumph. They had stopped the facility from collapsing for now. "You did well," Xander said softly, his voice filled with quiet pride. His arm remained steady around her, supporting her weight as she tried to steady herself. His warmth seeped into her, grounding her in the moment. Silas pushed off the core, brushing a hand through his disheveled silver hair. His usual smirk was back, though there was an edge of fatigue in his expression. "I have to admit, Lily, you're full of surprises," he said, his tone light but genuine. "Most people would have crumbled under that kind of pressure." Lily managed a weak smile, her heart still racing from the intense experience. "Thanks, I guess," she said, her voice hoarse. She pulled away from Xander slowly, testing her legs. They felt shaky, but held her weight. Xander stepped back, watching her closely. "You need to rest," he said, his concern evident. "The bond takes a toll, especially when you're still learning to control it." Lily nodded, but her gaze lingered on the core. The cracks were gone, and its glow had returned to a steady, calming rhythm. Yet she couldn't shake the feeling that their victory was temporary, that something darker was still lurking just out of sight. As if reading her thoughts, Silas spoke up. "The core's stable for now, but this won't be the last time it's targeted," he said, his usual levity replaced by a serious undertone. "Whoever's after you isn't going to stop." Lily looked between them, her resolve hardening despite her exhaustion. "Then we won't stop either," she said firmly. "Whatever comes next, we'll face it together." Xander nodded, his expression serious. "We will," he said, his voice steady. "But first, we need to regroup. This fight isn't just about protecting the core, it's about protecting each other." Silas rolled his eyes, though his smirk softened. "And here I thought I was the dramatic one," he said, earning a faint chuckle from Lily. They made their way back through the corridors, the facility eerily quiet in the aftermath of the breach. Lily could feel the bond humming steadily, a reassuring presence that connected her to Xander and Silas. It was a strange comfort, knowing that no matter what happened, they were tied together. When they reached the main room, Lily sank onto the couch, her body finally giving in to the weight of exhaustion. Xander sat beside her, his calm presence anchoring her. Silas leaned against the wall, his arms crossed as he watched them with a thoughtful expression. For a moment, none of them spoke. The silence was heavy but not uncomfortable, a shared understanding passing between them. They had been through a lot in a short amount of time, and though the road ahead was uncertain, they were stronger for it. Finally, Silas broke the silence. "So, what's the plan, fearless leader?" he asked, his tone light, but his eyes sharp as he looked at Xander. Xander leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. We need to prepare, he said. The bond is stronger now, but so are the threats against us. We need to stay one step ahead. Lily nodded, her determination matching his. And we need to figure out who's behind all of this, she added. If we can stop them at the source, maybe we can put an end to it. Silas tilted his head, his smirk returning. Look at you, already thinking like a strategist, he said. I'm impressed. Lily rolled her eyes, but she couldn't help the small smile that tugged at her lips. Despite his teasing, Silas had a way of making her feel more confident, more capable. Xander stood, his presence commanding as he addressed them. We'll take shifts tonight, he said. We need to stay vigilant. Silas sighed dramatically, but gave a mock salute. Yes, sir, he said, though his usual sarcasm was tempered by a genuine respect for Xander's leadership. As they settled in for the night, Lily felt a mix of exhaustion and anticipation. The bond was growing stronger, and with it, so was her connection to Xander and Silas. She knew the path ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time, she felt ready to face it. Xander placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch grounding. Get some sleep, he said softly. We'll handle the rest. Lily nodded, her eyes growing heavy as she leaned back against the couch. The hum of the bond lulled her into a deep sleep, the steady presence of Xander and Silas a comforting reminder that she wasn't alone. As the facility fell into a quiet stillness, the three of them prepared for the challenges ahead, their bond unbreakable. Whatever dangers awaited them, they would face them together. And this time, they wouldn't just survive, they would fight back.